Now, the administration is using a 2001 authorization to legitimize our escalation of military action against Islamic State militants in Syria and in Iraq. Representative Adam Schiff of California, senior member of the House Intelligence Committee, is leading efforts to bring this to a congressional vote. Good to have you on our set tonight, Congressman.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
The good news is, before I jump into this conversation, the good news is that your seat is safe. You don't seem to be in any real trouble.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, knock on wood for tomorrow's election. But your party is facing an uphill battle, if we are to believe the punditry. What do you make in advance of tomorrow's vote just a few hours from now?
Well, I think it's going to be very close. And as they say, and it's quite true, it's all going to come down to the turnout. If turnout exceeds projections, then we will do fine. We'll hold on to the Senate. If turnout doesn't, then we're going to be in trouble. And we're already fighting the historic trend in the midterm of this president's second term. So we're up against a bit of a breeze blowing us in the face, but nothing that can't be overcome if we can get our people to the polls.
In the House, you are used to, as a Democrat, being in the minority party, and the minority party, and my word, not yours, being obstructed on any number of things by the other side. But if Republicans take over the House and the Senate, and certainly if they increase seats in the House, what do you expect from the Republican Party?
Well, I think, first of all, a lot more of the same. So we'll continue to have this gridlock in the Congress, but it will likely be even worse because in the House, we've had probably 50 votes to repeal Obamacare. We haven't had that in the Senate because they've been in Democratic hands, and actually the Senate has moved forward with things like a comprehensive immigration bill. If the Senate, too, is in Republican hands, you can count on now a spate of sort of symbolic votes to repeal Obamacare in both houses. You'll have efforts to water down and go after Dodd-Frank and deregulate the investment banking houses. Normally, you get that wave of deregulation after you've recovered from the economic crisis. We're still in recovery mode, but yet they're pushing to undo some of the protections that we put in place after the meltdown. You'll see more of that. You'll see an effort to unwind some of the environmental protections the president has put in place dealing with greenhouse gases. You'll see a push on the Keystone Pipeline. And probably the biggest impact, too, is if we have a vacancy on the Supreme Court, how that will affect the president's ability to nominate a new justice.
How then, as a member of the minority party, if this turns out to be the case in both the House and the Senate, how do you govern? How do you wage war on the fights that need to be fought when you're fighting from the back flank, so to speak?
Well, I think there are a couple of things we have to do. Is one, we have to call them out on in the direction they want to take the country, and this will unfortunately, for better or for worse, the day after this midterm is when the presidential campaign gets started, and what they do if they were to gain the majority in both houses will say a lot about what kind of a presidential campaign they're going to run, what kind of a platform they have, what they want to see, and we need to call them on it. We need to call them on precisely what policies they want to enact. Right now, I think there's a sentiment that's just going to vote against the president's party. They're not voting for the Republicans because they don't know what the GOP stands for. In the next year or two, we'll find out what the GOP stands for, and I think that is something that we're going to have to flesh out. More than that, though, we'll have to try to find a way to be productive. And I think probably the area where there's still a great potential to be productive is on the subject of immigration reform. Because immediately after the last presidential election, I think the grown-ups in the Republican Party made the decision if they ever wanted to have a chance at the White House, they needed to do immigration reform. Once we get through the midterms, those grown-ups outside the Beltway are going to tell the Tea Party clique within the Beltway, you need to get out of the way. We need to get immigration reform done, or we can say goodbye to the White House for a very long time.
So I'd be remiss, of course, to not ask you about what might happen tomorrow on the eve of tomorrow's elections, but the reason why we wanted you on the program was to talk about this other issue. So let me I want to just sit back for a second and let you explain how this works and how the president is operating, under what authority he's operating at the moment, and why congressional involvement is necessary. But before you jump into that, I think most Americans who are paying any attention to this, and many are, of course, because national security is clearly an issue here. I think maybe even in these elections tomorrow. But for most Americans watching this, they see a president who has obviously already engaged in this war with ISIS. So under what authority is he doing that? How's he getting away doing that? What are you calling for? What's not happening? Set the stage.
Yeah. Well, the president is relying on the authority that Congress passed in the days after 9/11, the 2001 authorization to use force. He's relying on that, as well as the 2002 authorization to use force against Iraq. Both of those precedents, I think, really don't apply here. But in the absence of wanting to come to Congress and feeling, I think, the administration that they couldn't get this dysfunctional Congress to do anything, they didn't want to put all their eggs in the congressional basket. So they're relying on these old authorities. I think they realize this is a very tentative legal constitutional basis. And frankly, I don't think it's enough. I think Congress really needs to act. As you know, I introduced a resolution authorizing what the president has been undertaking. This is a new war that we're in. It's likely to last for years. The administration has acknowledged as much. And the Constitution gives Congress alone the power to declare war. And that declaration now takes the form of an authorization to use force. If we fail to act, then future presidents are going to look at this and they're going to say, we no longer need Congress's approval to go to war. We can go to war on our own. That this clause in the Constitution that gives that power of declaring war to Congress, that's an historic anachronism, a meaningless anachronism. That would be a very dangerous precedent. Because while I have confidence that this president doesn't lightly entertain the decision to go to war and has been very resistant to an escalation of that war effort, while many are calling for the introduction of American ground troops, who knows what the next president will be like. And we've got to be concerned about the precedent we're setting here.
What scares you most about the precedent that we're setting unwittingly?
Well, that future presidents can decide they can make war without the buy-in of the Congress. And when you don't have the buy-in of the Congress, it often means you also don't have the buy-in of the American people. And the power of the president becomes that much greater. And particularly here on issues of war and peace, that's an area where you really want the checks and balances that the Founding Fathers had in mind. And I find it a deep irony that the same Speaker of the House of Representatives who claims the president has too much authority and is purportedly suing the president for implementing the Affordable Care Act, even though he doesn't want it implemented because he feels the president is exercising too much authority, is the same Speaker who is content to let the president go to war without having a vote in Congress.
I hear your point earlier, Congressman Schiff, that when you don't have the buy-in of the Congress, it sometimes means that you don't have the buy-in of the American people. I think that's accurate. In this instance, I'm not sure I read it the same way. That is to say that I don't know that any president would not have the buy-in, whatever that means, of the American people, given the bill of goods we've sold the American people about our absolute necessity to fight this war on terror around the globe, and to make sure that, you know, we do everything we can to avoid another 9/11 happening on our soil. I'm not so sure that the president, even if Americans are unaware of it, doesn't, if not overtly, tacitly have the support of the American people, so long as we think he's fighting a terrorist organization like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc.
Tavis, I think you're right. Okay. I think the president here does have the support of the American people. And if we had a vote in Congress, I think there would be an authorization to use force. But here's the problem, even for the current military action, and that is things are going to get tough. They always are saying, is this the right strategy, and do we need ground troops, et cetera, and what about what's happening in Syria? When things get tough, you want to make sure that you have a strong bipartisan level of support for what's going on, because the country will start to question, okay, are we moving in the right direction? And you want the Congress bought in so that they have the strategic patience, so that they can go back to the constituents and say, yes, these are legitimate concerns, but let's give this a chance to succeed. And in the absence of any kind of a buy-in by the Congress, then I think the military action is on a very slender footing. And when things get tough, that can be a real problem.
Does the president read what happened in 2001 with regard to authorization, in 2002 with regard to authorization? Does he read that as an open check, as a blank check, as an open-ended opportunity for him to do whatever he wants against ISIS without having to come back to Congress? Or did the clock start again on that sort of 60-day rule that the president can engage militarily for 60 days without it being declared war and come back to Congress only at the end of that 60 days? Which one is he operating under?
I think he's operating on the assumption that those War Powers Act clocks really don't apply here. They may give us the...
So 60 days is not his concern?
I don't think so, because they're viewing this as the authorization that would be required under the War Powers Act. So their view is, we already have the authorization. We don't need to worry about the clock anymore. But I think they also recognize that's a very slender read. The reason why they chose to rely on the authorization is twofold. One, they weren't confident that even though Congress supports what the administration is doing, that Congress could come together on the wording of what the resolution would be. Because we will have a fight over whether in that wording we should preclude the use of American ground troops. And I think that was the primary reason he didn't want to come to Congress. The second reason why he relied on the authorization to use force is that the alternative was to say that I have the inherent power as Commander-in-Chief under Article 2 to do this even without congressional authorization. And very wisely, I think, they decided that was a precedent they did not want to set.
He's already said, not to be confused with what he might do, he's already said repeatedly that he's not interested and will not use ground troops. He said things before and had to move the line. What's your sense of whether or not he meant what he said?
I think he means what he says, but a lot of this, of course, is what do people mean by the use of ground troops? I think there very well might come a time when the military command says, hey, we need to go support the Iraqis in taking back Mosul, for example, and we're going to need to embed some of our advisors that can call in precision airstrikes, that can be there when things are tough to advise the Iraqis to firm up their spine in the fight. So I want to be able to put a small number of people embedded with these units. There very well may come a time where Chairman Dempsey of the Joint Chiefs comes to the President, makes that case, and I could see the President saying, okay, let's do it.
In 30 seconds, right quick, so that I'm clear and the audience is clear, given the hard time that McConnell and certainly Boehner give the President all the time on public policy matters, what is the interest? Why would John Boehner not challenge the President on what he's doing if we ultimately think it's giving the President more power?
Well, I think that the war potentially divides the Republican base, and probably more importantly, at least at the moment, they didn't want the war issue to distract from the issues they wanted to go to the voters with during the midterms. So they're happy maybe to discuss this after the midterms, but they didn't want to change the subject from what they thought that was their battlefield advantage in the midterm elections.
In other words, politics.
Yes.
Congressman, good to have you on. I don't want to be premature in saying congratulations tomorrow, but it looks like you're gonna pull out your race. We will see what happens to your party in the next 24 hours.
Great to be with you.
Good to have you on. Adam Schiff, Congressman, Democrat, of course, here in Southern California. Coming up, Grammy winner John Cicada with a new memoir, A New Day. Stay with us.